Have you ever found yourself projecting this image of absolute bulletproof happiness right at the exact moment your foundation is quietly cracking beneath you?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic defense mechanism.
Right. It's fascinating. It's almost universally human. You go to the dinner party, you laugh a little too loudly, you project this radiant energy, and it's all specifically designed to blind people to the absolute wreckage you're trying to hide just out of frame.
Yeah, the classic sleight of hand. Look over here so you don't see the mess over there.
Exactly. We all do it on a micro level. But today, we're exploring what happens when one of the defining figures of mid-century American art does exactly that, but on a monumental, almost architectural scale. Welcome to the deep dive.
And this is a really incredible topic today.
It really is. Today, we're dissecting Je t'aime no faith, a massive canvas created between 1955 and 1957 by Robert Motherwell. We're doing a full structural and historical analysis today, really decoding the abstract expressionism and the art of heartbreak woven into this piece.
It's arguably one of the most psychologically complex pieces to emerge from the 1950s New York art scene. And what we're really doing with our sources today is a forensic reconstruction.
A visual autopsy.
Yeah, visual autopsy.
Yeah.
We're going to mentally rebuild this painting layer by layer for you, examining the architecture beneath the paint. But more importantly, we're trying to solve a very specific historical mystery.
Which is why an artist who had built his entire reputation on these heavy, oppressive, almost exclusively black and white compositions suddenly erupted into this vibrant, wildly colorful, passionate declaration.
Right. And to understand the sheer impact of that eruption, we have to start with the physical reality of the object itself. You can't just talk about a Motherwell painting as a mere image. You have to confront its physical footprint.
Yeah, the scale is crucial here. We're looking at a canvas that measures exactly 70 and 18 inches high by 100 inches wide.
That specific fraction, the 18th of an inch, that always strikes me.
You too.
It suggests this level of exactitude and deliberate framing that completely belies the supposed wildness of the painting. But you're right about the footprint. At nearly 6 feet tall and over 8 feet wide, this isn't a painting you just glance at while walking down a gallery hallway.
No, it's an environment.
Exactly. It entirely consumes your peripheral vision. It forces a somatic response because it's scaled to the human body, actually scaled slightly larger than the human body, so it dominates you physically when you stand before it.
I always think about the physical choreography required to even create something on that scale. I mean, the medium is oil and charcoal on canvas. He's not sitting delicately at a drafting table.
Not at all.
Applying heavy oil paint across an 8-foot expanse requires him to use his shoulders, his back, his legs. It's an athletic endeavor. And that physical exertion ties directly into the movement this piece belongs to, which is abstract expressionism.
Right, the New York school. When we look at the origins of abstract expressionism in 1940s and 50s New York, the entire philosophy hinged on two core tenets. First, the reliance on unidentifiable forms. And second, the necessity of spontaneous acts of creating art.
Spontaneity is key there.
It is. The canvas wasn't supposed to be a picture of something. It was supposed to be an arena in which an event took place. The form itself isn't a recognizable noun. It isn't a landscape or a figure. It's an emotional verb translated into oil and charcoal.
But I've always struggled a bit with that rigid definition of spontaneity, and we're definitely going to complicate that idea when we get to Motherwell's actual technique later on.
Oh, we definitely will.
But conceptually, I want you to imagine something for a second. If I tell you to paint the raw, visceral experience of an agonizing heartbreak, and I explicitly ban you from painting a weeping figure or a shattered object, you're forced to rely entirely on the primal vocabulary of the medium.
You have to find a new language.
Right. You have to use the velocity of the brush, the density of the pigment, and the thermal temperature of the color to communicate the devastation.
And that constraint is precisely what generates the power of these works. By stripping away narrative and representation, the abstract expressionists were trying to mainline emotion directly into the viewer's subconscious.
It's pure feeling.
Exactly. But Motherwell's approach to this, specifically in Je t'aime, 4, is highly methodical in its construction. If we actually perform that visual autopsy of this piece, the sequence of layers reveals a very deliberate emotional architecture.
Let's actually walk through that structure because the specific stratigraphy of the paint tells a massive part of the story here. If you visualize this 8-foot expanse, the foundational layer, the ground floor of this composition, consists of these massive dominating blocks of warm colors.
We're talking reds, tans, yellows, and oranges.
Right. It establishes this incredibly hot, radiating baseline.
It's an aggressive foundation. When you lay down large blocks of red and orange, you're creating a surface that visually advances toward the viewer. Warm colors inherently possess an optical aggression. They refuse to recede. They demand immediate attention.
But he doesn't just leave it there. On top of that radiating heat, he introduces the middle layer. He hits random areas of the canvas with blue, red, and tan. And I think the introduction of the blue is critical here.
Oh, completely.
You have this sweeping foundational warmth, and suddenly it's interrupted, or maybe even wounded, by these intrusions of cooler blue cutting across the surface.
Yeah, the blue acts as a massive optical disruption. And then he seals the composition with a top layer consisting of white, yellow, and tan. But the most crucial technical element here, and this is what really defines the visual friction of the piece, is his strict refusal to blend these layers into one another.
This is the part that completely fascinates me. He's working with oil, a medium practically invented for its blending capabilities, for creating those seamless gradients and soft transitions.
Right, the old masters lived for blending.
Exactly. Yet he imposes this incredibly rigid constraint. Our sources note there is hardly any mixing of colors whatsoever. Aside from lightening a few specific areas with white creating a little red-white, blue-white, or black-white, the colors are kept entirely distinct and isolated.
It's a deliberate rejection of harmony. When you place a slab of pure, unmixed red immediately adjacent to a slab of pure, unmixed blue without any transitional gradient, you create a hard boundary.
A fault line.
A fault line, perfectly put. Those colors don't sit peacefully next to each other. They vibrate. They fight for dominance. It forces the eye to abruptly jump from one wavelength to the next, creating a constant nervous optical tension across the entire 8-foot span.
Which brings us perfectly to Motherwell's specific concept of push and pull. I know Hans Hofmann famously codified this idea in color theory, but Motherwell completely internalizes and weaponizes it here. The theory dictates that all movement within a painting necessarily implies a reciprocal movement in the opposing direction.
It's basic visual physics. It's about maintaining a dynamic equilibrium. If that massive block of unmixed advancing red on the left side of the canvas is visually pulling the viewer's eye forward, the composition will collapse under its own weight unless there's a reciprocal push.
So he has to counter it.
He does. So Motherwell counters that advancing red with a sharp, receding plane of cool blue or stark white on the opposite side.
It turns the canvas into a closed ecosystem of competing forces. Because there's no horizon line, no recognizable figure for your eye to rest on, your gaze is trapped in this endless loop of tension, constantly negotiating the hard edges between these unmixed colors.
It's an incredibly active, almost exhausting experience for the viewer.
But then right in the center of all this meticulously orchestrated, unidentifiable abstraction, he commits what could almost be considered heresy within the strict dogma of the New York school.
He introduces a highly recognizable, utterly literal form.
The text. Written boldly across this chaotic, vibrating expanse of primary colors is the phrase "Je t'aime," French for "I love you."
It's a massive disruption.
It really is. You have this pure, non-objective expression of emotion, and then he just stamps the most loaded, universally understood romantic phrase right into the middle of it.
And that text dictated the entire public reception of the work. When you present an 8-foot canvas erupting in passionate reds and yellows, aggressively featuring the phrase "Je t'aime," the public and critical assumption is immediate and obvious. Everyone assumed Motherwell was in the throes of a profound, consuming romantic love.
It reads like a monumental, uncontainable Valentine.
Exactly.
I completely see why they thought that. But this is where the historical reality absolutely shatters the aesthetic assumption. The private reality of Motherwell's life between 1955 and 1957, the exact window he was painting this series, was one of total domestic collapse.
He wasn't falling in love. He was in the middle of a brutal divorce from his second wife.
That contextual pivot changes everything about how we read the painting. The vibrant colors and the romantic declaration aren't an overflow of what he possessed. They are an acute manifestation of his deficit. The historical analysis points out that he didn't create these paintings because he was in love. He created them because he had a profound, desperate need for love.
It's a devastating paradox. And the art historian H.H. Arneson captures this tension brilliantly in our source text. Arneson argues that Motherwell is unquestionably a romantic, but that his works are an intense, if generalized, reflection of his day-to-day life, his innermost emotions, his passionate involvement with art, and the world in which he lives.
Okay, I have to challenge Arneson's use of the word generalized there. How can a painting featuring the literal phrase je t'aime, painted during a specific divorce, be considered a generalized reflection? It feels incredibly pointed and hyper-specific to his trauma.
I see your point, but I actually think generalized is the exact right word, precisely because he strips away the narrative specifics. If he wanted to paint a specific reflection of his divorce, he could have painted a domestic interior or a fractured portrait.
Two figures turning away from each other.
Exactly. But instead, he generalizes the feeling of the loss, the banal day-to-day bureaucracy of a divorce. The lawyers, the arguments, the division of assets is distilled into pure optical tension. The push and pull we discussed earlier, that's the generalized reflection of the emotional whiplash of his daily life.
Ah, I see. So the unmixed colors vibrating against each other, the aggressive heat of the reds clashing with the blues, that is the structural equivalent of his internal state. He's bypassing the anecdote of his divorce to get to the underlying physics of his grief.
Precisely. He channels the very specific trauma of his failing marriage into a broader, almost mythic involvement with the canvas itself. But the way he executes this brings us to another massive contradiction that completely upends our earlier definition of abstract expressionism.
Yes, the myth of spontaneity. We're taught to view these painters as acting on pure, unfiltered impulse, just approaching the canvas and letting the subconscious take the wheel.
The whole action painting narrative.
Right. But the historical record reveals a deeply methodical, almost calculating process behind Motherwell's chaos here. He didn't just walk up and start throwing paint. He would meticulously trace out his composition first, make deliberate structural changes to the drawing, and only then would he begin applying the paint.
It's an incredible subversion of the movement's ethos. If you look very closely at the surface of Je t'aime no, you can actually see the residual charcoal tracing marks hiding just beneath the layers of oil. The evidence of his premeditation is baked right into the final product.
Doesn't that fundamentally compromise the emotional rawness of the piece, though? If you're carefully tracing out your agony before you paint it, isn't it just a performance of emotion rather than an expression of it?
I'm not sure I agree with that premise. I don't think premeditation negates emotion. In this case, I think it contains it. Think about his psychological state. His marriage is dissolving, his personal life is in chaos. When you are emotionally untethered, you often seek rigid structures to keep yourself from completely falling apart.
So the tracing is a coping mechanism.
Exactly. The tracing isn't a lack of emotion, it's a desperately needed scaffolding. He needed that preliminary charcoal architecture to hold the explosive weight of the reds and yellows. Otherwise, the painting, much like his life at that moment, would just collapse into formless mud.
That's a brilliant way to reframe it. The tracing is the containment vessel for the breakdown, and that reliance on structure perfectly connects to his deep background in collage. We know he brought the sensibilities of papier-collé to his massive canvases.
He did.
And Arneson explicitly points out that these paintings retain definite aspects of the geometric cutout shapes found in his collages.
The collage aesthetic is crucial here. When you cut a shape out of paper and paste it down, you create an absolute, definitive, hard edge. It's an uncompromising boundary. When Motherwell translates that aesthetic to a monumental oil painting, treating his large blocks of background color as if they were geometric cutouts, he's imposing a rigid, almost violent geometry onto the fluid medium of oil paint.
Which ties right back to his refusal to mix the colors. The unmixed edges of the paint mimic the sharp, scissor-cut edges of a collage.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. He's building this chaotic, emotionally devastated declaration of love, but he's constructing it with the clinical geometric precision of a collage artist.
It's the tension between the Apollonian structure and the Dionysian emotion. But to really grasp how radical this entire synthesis was for Motherwell, we have to contextualize Je t'aime within the broader timeline of his career. We have to look at what preceded this explosion of color and what immediately followed it.
Because this painting is a total anomaly. It is an island of vivid color surrounded by a massive ocean of black and white. Motherwell's baseline, the visual vocabulary he is most famous for, is heavily reliant on stark, aggressive blacks.
If we look at the work leading directly into this period, specifically Elegy to the Spanish Republic XXXIV, which he worked on between 1953 and 1954, The contrast is jarring.
Yeah.
In the Elegy series, while there's a minimal suggestion of color in the background, he entirely suppresses it.
It's pushed way back.
Way back.
Yeah.
He covers the vast majority of the canvas with these massive, oppressive, black-shaped bars and ovals.
The Elegy series feels so incredibly heavy to me. The color is there, but it's suffocated. It's trapped behind this impenetrable black architecture. It's mourning materialized. And then he enters his divorce in 1955, and suddenly the black bars vanish.
Right.
The Je t'aime series erupts into these luminous, unmixed primary colors. It's as if the structural integrity of his black and white world just shattered, exposing the raw, colorful nerves underneath.
And the aberration is fleeting. As soon as the Je t'aime series concludes, as his divorce is finalized and he moves into the late 1950s, he immediately regresses to his baseline.
He goes right back to black.
He does. If you examine Totem Exiguo, painted between 1958 and 1960, the vivid reds and blues are gone. He returns to using his brushwork primarily to render heavy black forms. The color is drained away, and the black reasserts its dominance.
That bracketing makes the Je t'aime series feel almost like a fever dream in his catalog. It's a temporary, highly localized atmospheric disruption. Arneson summarizes this disruption beautifully when he notes that the important difference in this specific painting lies in the sheer expressionist exuberance of the calligraphy and the degree to which the brilliant color variations are unified by the sensuous impasto of the brushwork.
It has so much packed into that analysis. When Arneson highlights the exuberance of the calligraphy, he's validating that the text itself is an active participant in the abstraction.
It's not just a label.
Right. The Je t'aime isn't written with a detached typographical neatness. It's slashed across the canvas. The handwriting contains the same kinetic, desperate energy as the blocks of color beneath it.
And the mention of the sensuous impasto is the key to understanding the surface tension. For anyone unfamiliar, impasto means the paint isn't flat. He's laying it on so thickly that it acquires its own topography.
It becomes three-dimensional.
Exactly. The surface is heavily textured, deeply physical. Between the visceral ridges of the impasto, the violent calligraphy, and the vibrating, unmixed color variations, the canvas practically hums with anxiety.
But what I find most compelling about the historical record of this series is that it isn't just one static scream of pain. Motherwell painted a sequence, and by tracking the variations from painting to painting, we can actually map the psychological trajectory of his grief. We can watch his emotional state evolve in real time.
Let's track that evolution because it completely changes how you view a multi-year project like this. The series begins with Je t'aime no tu. The analysis shows that in this early stage, he leans almost exclusively on warm colors. The composition features very few forms, and the brushwork is described as incredibly harsh, all explicitly serving to express this raw longing for love.
Think about the psychology of that early stage. The fracture of the marriage is fresh. The dominant emotional frequencies are anger, panic, and an overwhelming searing pain.
Pure agony.
Pure agony. That translates visually to a stripped-down composition dominated by aggressive reds and oranges applied with violent, scratching brushstrokes. It's the acute phase of trauma. There's no room for nuance yet. It's just a pure, unadulterated distress signal.
It's the initial shockwave. But then we arrive at our focal point, Je t'aime, and the internal climate has shifted entirely. The composition becomes infinitely more complicated. He starts introducing overlapping forms, and crucially, those cool blue colors enter the frame.
The cognitive dissonance is set in. He isn't just reacting blindly anymore. He is negotiating the wreckage. The overlapping forms represent the tangled, contradictory realities of separating two lives.
The push and pull is at its absolute maximum here.
Yes, the harsh, panicked heat of Noah 2 is now actively fighting against the melancholic, cooling blues. It's the visual manifestation of bargaining, of trying to establish order amidst the chaos, hence the heavy reliance on the underlying tracing and collage structures we discussed.
It's a mind desperately trying to process its own heartbreak. And then we reach the conclusion of the arc with Je t'aime no. The transformation is staggering. The complex, vibrating layers of overlapping color are gone. The record notes that he uses barely any forms at all, and the entire massive canvas is dominated by mostly one single color.
It's the onset of exhaustion. The frantic, desperate energy required to maintain the push and pull of Noah 2 has completely burned out. The sharp, unmixed boundaries have dissolved.
The fight is over.
The fight is over. Psychologically, it reads as the void that follows the panic. Has he achieved a state of acceptance, or has the longing for love simply hollowed him out to the point of numbness? The singularity of the canvas suggests a profound silence after a prolonged period of screaming.
It really is an astonishing progression. He had to physically paint his way through the entire spectrum of his grief, from the violent heat of the initial break, through the complex, overlapping negotiations of the middle phase, all the way to the monochromatic exhaustion of the end. And all of that just so he could finally return to the stark black and white reality of his subsequent work.
It serves as a monumental reminder that the emotional utility of art isn't always about expressing what you have in abundance. Sometimes it is the only viable mechanism for navigating an overwhelming deficit.
Exactly. We started this deep dive looking at a massive 8-foot canvas radiating with brilliant reds, yellows, and a sweeping declaration of romance. On the surface, it masqueraded as the ultimate expression of joy.
The perfect dinner party facade.
Right. But by digging into the architecture of the paint, the unmixed boundaries, the hidden charcoal tracing, the rigid collage geometry, we uncovered the true foundation. It wasn't a monument to a love he possessed. It was a brightly colored distress flag raised by a man actively losing his anchor.
Which leaves us with a fascinating psychological mirror to hold up to ourselves. If Robert Motherwell managed to create his most vibrant, colorful, and unexpected masterpiece, not by celebrating his abundance, but by obsessively mapping out his most desperate lack, it forces a reevaluation of our own empty spaces.
It really does. What void in your own life are you currently viewing as a weakness or a failure? What if that specific lack is actually the perfect, massive blank canvas you need? What monumental thing could you construct not out of what you have, but out of the exact thing you are missing? Keep looking past the surface of things, look for the tracing marks underneath, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.